Hello everyone, this video is trying to answer the question as best I can for you on the connection between trauma and anxiety. There's a lot of information on it, so if you understand it again, that puts you in a position of more power to do something about it. So the question is, does trauma cause anxiety? And my answer is, in simple terms, yes, it can. It's a big contributor to anxiety for many reasons. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. The reason why trauma has a strong association with anxiety is because it's an extreme form of stress. If we take an example of witnessing a car accident, for example, it's a traumatic thing to see. You might see people get hurt, you might have been in danger yourself, so it really activates in an extreme way the flight or fight response. So huge stress on the nervous system can over time lead to a sensitized nervous system, a tired and fatigued nervous system, which is the true cause of anxiety. So the nervous system, instead of being in this lovely rest and digest zone, starts to ramp up and over time switch into alert mode. And then it starts to get involved in everyday stresses, emails from people, random thoughts, all the sorts of stuff that we know contribute or are experienced in the present moment as anxiety. So yes, so there's a strong connection with trauma. Of course, the more traumas people experience, so the more time you're exposed to trauma, if you think about people or army veterans in war, of course, that cumulative effect of dealing with multiple traumas, of course, puts more and more stress on the system over time. So it's harder for the body to deal with. So, of course, that it makes sense that that can then lead to anxiety over time. It's not necessarily the trauma, though, that causes the anxiety. It's if the trauma is not dealt with or processed, so that energy and emotion that comes with witnessing or experiencing a trauma, having something happen to you that's quite traumatic. There's lots of ways of it. It could be violence, it could be witnessing something terrible, it can be going through a divorce. As a child, often these traumas happen when we're children and we are unable to understand them. So it's not necessarily the trauma itself that causes anxiety. It's whether or not we're able to process it, understand it, and release all the energy and the tension that is normal in the moment. So again, if you witness a car accident, normal for it to be a very stressful situation. If we are unable to ever talk about it, to understand that, say, things like if we witness a death, that death is a normal part of life, as hard as it is to deal with. If we start to then blame ourselves, or did I cause it? Should I have done this? I could have protected that person. It's my fault that this bad thing happened to me. It's when we start to go through down that route, we are unable to have outlets to talk about traumas, to understand why they happen, to understand our body, what's our physical reaction to it, and why we get a physical response as well as thoughts about a situation. That cumulative stress stays on the nervous system because we at some point repress it, we push it aside. Understandably, sometimes when we're very young, we don't have the ability or the cognitive ability to deal with it. So we go into survival mode, we repress it, we push it away, which makes sense. But ultimately what that does, that stress stays in the system. It's cumulative and we sort of switch it into high alert mode a bit more. We might go into a bit of survival mode, which is often why these things don't resurface till later on in life when we can't do it any longer. The energy it takes to keep these emotions repressed, to avoid thinking about these thoughts, these experiences, is a huge amount of energy, and the nervous system, which is the control mechanism to do that, gets tired. And so we can't live in this survival mode for very long. The challenge is, of course, that we don't necessarily realize we're in survival mode because this happens gradually over a period of time, days, weeks, months, years, many years for some people. So we don't realize what's happening. We think our current state is normal. And so we may not ever see a connection between how we feel or anxiety manifesting 10 or 20 years later and things that have happened from the past. Anxiety is not necessarily caused by one trauma. Again, it's what we then do as a result of it or don't do. If we're able to talk about it, process it, understand it, it still won't be pleasant, but we're able to release a lot of that energy on the nervous system so we can then get back to equilibrium. We can allow the body to go back into rest and digest mode, which helps us restabilize over time. So again, it's our inability to deal with trauma. We then go into repression, suppression mode, and then the body can only do that for so long. And perhaps ironically, if we experience panic or anxiety comes on later on, it's the body's way of trying to get our attention to deal with it, to say, Sam, I can't continue like this anymore. I can't continue repressing this energy. It needs to be released. But of course, we just interpret it as a problem. And of course, it feels really hard in the moment, as I talk about in other videos. So that is the connection. Obviously, the more traumas we experience, the harder it is, but it can be little, what some people call micro traumas. I'm not a big fan of labels, but it can be, some bullying at school or feeling excluded at school, for example. It can be things that maybe we might not consider big traumas, but they do have a lasting impact, particularly when we're younger. So it can be a series of those events. Often we diminish our experiences and say, oh, well, that's normal, that shouldn't have an impact on me now. But it's important to keep an open mind. We don't have to dwell on or revisit the traumas, so to speak. It's just useful to understand that they do have an impact so we can then make sense of our current state and go, I get it. Now I know why I'm in this state, because these traumas have contributed to it, plus how I either did or deal with it without any blame along the way that's maybe kept my nervous system under pressure for all this amount of time. Just a short video today. I hope that makes sense. If you've got any questions, please leave them in the comments, and I'll attempt to address them in further videos, but I hope to see you again very soon. Take care.